Now, what better way to talk shop than to talk tools? Yeah, little power tool joke for you there. I know how to build things. All right. We are going to hear from Richard Vreeland today as he showcases some personal tools and curiosities for the fellow noisemaker.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rich Vreeland. I make music and sounds under the name Disasterpeace, and I've been doing that for about, gosh, maybe 16, 16 years or so. Um, and uh, here's a, let's see, let's get the slide things going. So here are the few of the things that I've worked on over the years. Some films, some games, TV shows, some personal albums. Um, so lots of different kinds of things. And today, I want to talk about, well, my talk is called Sound Making Tools from the Disasterlab. And I want to talk about my own personal tool, my own personal, oh my God, my own personal journey uh, in in tools and what that's looked like for me and how that's influenced my creative process and just how it all started and where I've ended up and all that good stuff and hopefully that will be something that is interesting and useful. So let's dive in. So let's journey back. So where does this journey begin? So around maybe 2009 or so, I was in college and I heard about this thing called game jams. And I went to a game jam. The first game jam I went to was called the Global Game Jam. And I was in Boston at the time. I was going to Berklee College of Music. And there was a local chapter of Global Game Jam happening at MIT. And I went there and there were a bunch of other people interested in games, game developers, people who did artwork, people who did sound, programmers, people, maybe just people who are generally curious and, creative. And a bunch of people get together over the course of a weekend and get together in groups and work on different kinds of projects. And it was a really inspiring and fun experience. I, got to work on a couple of different games, doing music and sound effects, and I had never really thought much before about making a game of my own until that experience, and it really inspired me to start thinking about that. And so when I went home after the weekend, I started brainstorming, and this is the first idea that I came up with. Snow tongue, a forgotten pleasure. Basic premise, you're a child who moves around trying to catch snowflakes, etc., on your tongue. Different flakes sound different pitches to create music. It'll be higher res than this, but it's a side scroller. You walk around, slow moving landscape, you're looking stuff. You're walking, running, snowy suburb, you're on the sidewalk, question mark. Catch one snowflake, then another, and the parameters separating the two dictates notes, such as angle and distance. So this is just kind of a quick thing that I came up with. And yeah, that was sort of, that set me off on a particular path. I was also really inspired by the opening to the short animated film The Snowman. I believe it's a British animated film from the early 80s, sort of a Christmassy kind of thing. But it had this really cool opening with this person just kind of walking in a field. It sort of had a solemn kind of introspective feel, and so that was I thought that would be sort of a cool sort of vibe. So I hopped online and I started trying to figure out like, okay, how am I going to make a game? I found a tutorial for with a spaceship and stuff coming at you, and you shoot stuff. And I turned it right side up. I turned the ship into a person. I turned the enemies into snowflakes, and I was on my way. So that's kind of where it started. And after not too long, I started to have some kind of prototype. I started to work on, little sprites, little characters, walk around, lick some stuff. I started messing with, text, and had a basic thing going with licking snowflakes and making music. And the way it worked was you would lick a snowflake, it would play a note, and then you'd lick another snowflake, and it would play another note, and that note would be based on what the previous note was. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But it didn't stop there, because I just couldn't contain my excitement, and this shortly turned into a very ambitious game with plans for a full story, with an in-depth narrative, characters, different levels with different mechanics, a day-night cycle. I kind of envisioned, different seasons of the year, and, interacting with, leaves and basically other sort of analogies to similar to snowflakes. And this kind of set me off on a path, and it took me a while to kind of realize that, maybe that was a little overwrought and intense for my first game project. But I submitted a working version of the game to the Independent Games Festival a few years after I first started working on the game. But even from, fairly early on, there was a utility component to the game, which was that you would lick a bunch of snowflakes, and you could actually record little sequences of those performances and loop them back. And everything that you did, you could actually export as a MIDI file, so that you could, take what you did and use it in music, in your personal music, in a DAW or whatnot. So that's to say that, it sort of went off on a tangent trying to pursue this really ambitious project, but ultimately I circled back around to the idea that it was really about having fun and sort of blend, there's sort of a blend of just kind of the pure interaction of licking snowflakes and making music, and it having sort of a utility component where you're actually generating something that you can use. So that became the ultimate focus of January, which is what the tool or game is called. And here's a little bit of footage from January. So the way I built the music in this is that based on what the previous note was, it makes a decision on what the next note should be using probabilities. And I didn't know it at the time, but I actually basically implemented what's called a Markov chain. But I did it the hard way. Basically, I sat at the piano and I just figured out, okay, if the previous note was, a C, what's a good next note to use? And I basically did that in a bunch of different scales, and you can move between the scales. And it was just a very sort of natural, kind of naive process that I went through in building this game. And that's probably why it took me so long to work on it, and also why I got so much enjoyment out of that experience. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of ideas fell by the wayside, and what I ended up with was, simple, or maybe simpler, because it's still, it's fairly interesting. From at least to me, I found it interesting to have, like, some features like, licking different snowflakes. Some make chords. Some will, accompany your, the note with another note. There was a record feature where you could record, like I said, you could record little sequences. You could kind of play with the weather, There were lots of little things like that, but overall, it was a far simpler. What I landed on was far more simple than what I spent quite a lot of time sort of investigating, um, and I think that was probably for the best. And so yeah, that's the first leg of this story, which is that I was starting to work on games and went to a game jam and got really inspired to try to make a game of my own, and that kind of led me into coding and doing things with music and code. Uh, yeah, that's kind of where everything started for me. So fast forward a year and a half, and I'm asked to work on a game called Mini Metro, and the team working on Mini Metro, they're based in New Zealand, and they were looking for someone to do a fully procedural score for their game, and they had seen January. So in a way, I was fortunate that I went on this foolish journey, submitting to IGF and pursuing a more ambitious project, even though I eventually pared things down. But this project was a really important project for me. It was my first chance to really explore procedural music ideas in a larger context. And so I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to have worked on this project, and it was a lot of fun. And it was a chance to continue honing my coding skills as well, which was really fun. At that time I had mostly been doing scoring, and so to work on something where it was much more about building kind of small bits and pieces that could work interchangeably was a very nice change of pace. And so there's sort of a direct kind of through line from going to a game jam, making a game, kind of exploring music and code, it being a bit of a tool, and then working on Mini Metro, and then fast forward a year and a half again, and that's about the time that Mini Metro came out, and the game's done pretty well. It's still floating around, and also around that time, a new version of Logic Pro came out, and Logic Pro X, and Logic Pro is it's a DAW if you don't know, and I'm a longtime user of it, and one of the new features in Logic Pro X was MIDI plugins, which lets you manipulate MIDI going into your instruments and your effects, which was very exciting. And there's one plugin in particular at that time that catches my eye. And it's this one. So this is the script editor window for Scripter. And what Scripter is it's a MIDI plugin that lets you create your own MIDI scripts so that you can make your own MIDI effects, whether it's manipulating incoming MIDI, say like MIDI that you're performing, or generating new MIDI. And you can also stack MIDI effects, which is very cool. And so this was sort of a light bulb moment for me. And when I was sort of digging into it a little bit, for me, it has a very simple sort of JavaScript API. And for me, I had found up to this point that code can sometimes be a bother. You can get kind of lost in complexity, especially when you're dealing with lower level languages, when you have to deal with some of the quirks of particular languages, whether it's memory management or things that essentially just get in the way of the creativity. And so having a simple API, I found it easy to kind of get in and get out quick and just focus on the ideas. And one of my very first ideas using this API was to take the music system for Mini Metro and try to turn it into something that could be a reusable tool. And yeah, here's an excerpt from a video I made from right around that time that shows what I was working on. So yeah, this kind of thing became an obsession with me. This this is this is pretty much this is more or less all the scripts I've made over the last 6 years. Ideas would, especially early on, really started pouring in, um, because it was like I had a new power. Like it was like unlocking a hidden power within that I could do that, that I could like manipulate MIDI and come up with new ways to kind of be creative and affect kind of my compositional process. And I've been making these ever since that time. In the beginning, similar to January, it was like very ambitious. Like my first kind of script was like super ambitious and had a million features. And over time, I kind of like learned how to, pick and choose what was important and not throw the kitchen sink at every single thing. But I still have that tendency from time to time. And speaking from experience, it can be really important, I think, and valuable to try to limit the focus of what you're trying to make. But it's also tricky because I found there to be a lot of value in kind of pursuing essentially, what game developers would call feature creep. I got into the habit of pursuing feature creep as a creative strategy in order to discover interesting things. Of course, when you're doing this just for fun, for yourself, it can get a little carried away. So it's important to try to figure out like where to set your own boundaries. But yeah, I mean, there's a clear chronological line between going to this game jam and being inspired, coming up with an idea, making January, working on Mini Metro. This all led me to this kind of point where suddenly I felt like I had enough experience, I suppose, to really get interested in exploring lots of tools and also like having a good tool to work with in the Scripter API, which really helped me to be creatively agile and explore a lot of ideas quickly without being bogged down or without having a lack of confidence to really get in there and experiment. But, even though there is this clear chronological pattern, there's another pattern emerging, I think, which is that there's one type of experience and it's morphing into another one. There was January the game, which turned into a tool, Mini Metro the game, which led to this sort of the tool that was inspired by the game and the work that I did on it. And these sort of ideas, they lead me to the first ideation style that I want to talk to you guys about today, which is byproducts. Now, I came across this concept after I'd already been doing it unknowingly. So it's something that's kind of, I guess, been floating around. But, like projects, they often bear fruit beyond the project. There are all the things that you do when you work on a project, and some of them end up in the project, some of them don't. The question that I think is worth asking is, are there aspects of a project that you can spin out into something else? And in my experience, the answer to that is often yes. So we have these two examples, and here's another example, which is I worked on this game Solar Ash for the game took 6 years to make, and I worked on it for a pretty large majority of that time. And it's an ambitious open world game, and it came with a whole new set of challenges. And in thinking about this byproducts concept, I think about this game Solar Ash. For me, what it yielded was a new knowledge base, because I built a huge library of reusable code, whether it was audio effects, new maths that I hadn't interacted with before, useful algorithms for doing things, whether they were more on the side of game design problems or audio design or music, and then lots of things that were specific to the tools that we used, which was primarily the Unreal Engine. And then, working on an open world 3D game, I learned a lot about 3D. It was my first time really working on audio in a 3D environment, so I learned a whole lot about vectors and a whole lot of maths basically. And Unreal Engine was new for me too. So it really felt like I was back in school, because I was in some ways I was bringing a lot of experience, career experience to the project, but there were a lot of aspects of the project that were completely new to me. And so I really felt like I was learning a lot every day, and doing a lot of research, watching a lot of YouTube videos, tutorials, just really trying to soak in a lot of information. And I said that there was a lot of reusable stuff from this project, and obviously you can't always legally reuse things, but you can always reuse your knowledge. And there's a lot of knowledge that I feel like I gleaned from this project, and I've already applied some of the things that I learned on this project to other projects, and I think I will continue doing so, because when this project was over and I sat down and I started sort of like collating like notes and different things I had done, it was just a massive kind of folder of things to go through, and unexplored ideas, unrealized ideas, and some that were realized that could still potentially have applications elsewhere. So all of these have this pattern. There's a project, and the project yields a byproduct or byproducts, but there are patterns more specific than this that are, I think, happening here. They all happen to be games, yes, that led to tools. But this pattern of project yields byproducts, I've used this pattern for other things, and I'm sure a lot of you have too. Project yielding a soundtrack, a standalone soundtrack, different kinds of knowledge sharing, like blog posts, talks like this, workshop, videos, mentoring, all these sorts of things, to me are, there are things that come out of a project. You have certain experiences, and you're finding ways to kind of transmogrify those experiences into something else. So from a bird's eye view, I think of it as a project yielding creative tangents that are worth exploring, either because they haven't been fully explored yet, or because they've already borne fruit and they seem like they might bear fruit again in a different context. But personally, I like to focus on the idea of yielding small creative tangents, because I like smaller bits, and I find that they allow me to stay focused on creating, on the creative aspect of things, and I try not to get as bogged down in the complexities of larger projects, larger tangents, because they have their own problem sets. And similarly to some of the things I was talking about with the scripter API and, trying to find something agile with a low overhead so I can get in and get out, that sort of philosophy is important to me. And I apply that to this as well, which is that increasingly I look for ways to make more things that are leaner, because I think part of it is maybe just because it's very easy to spend a lot of time on something, and to you at some point you're not operating at the same level of efficiency, right? Like the longer you work on something, especially if it's like a multi-year project, it gets really difficult to make progress. And there's something really gratifying about having things to work on that are a project that you can sink your teeth into, sometimes for a day or a week, and it's just very potent, and it's a nice feeling. There are a lot of different reasons for why you might want to pursue creative things. That just happens to be like my personal preference, especially at this period in time in my career. And so this byproducts idea, here's a little diagram, like, the project journey that you take, it's rarely a straight line, right? There's, you're zigzagging, you're taking a circuitous path to get there, you're hitting roadblocks, and there are tangents, there are things that you're kind of running across, and some of them are things that you are able to integrate into the project, and that's great, and other things don't integrate, and that's not always a bad thing, because these might be things that you could use later. You learn things along that process, and some get used and some don't. And any of these things theoretically can be candidates for future projects via this sort of byproducts idea. And this pattern can theoretically repeat forever, as things branch out from other things, and so there's sort of an organic element to it, which I find pretty cool. And if you're like me, you might be juggling a couple of things at a time, and so you're kind of traversing multiple versions of this simultaneously. Like you're traversing one path for one project, and you're traversing another for another project. And sometimes those byproducts, they might overlap, or maybe one of these trees is yours and one of them is someone else's. And so where that leads me to is ideation style number 2, which is crossing streams. Or another way to think about it might be cross-pollination, or cross-disciplinary interactions, or something like that. Just like overlapping, essentially, and like recontextualizing things that you observe, things that inspire you, and that aren't necessarily related to music or audio or whatever field you happen to be working in. So like from my perspective, when I really got into the MIDI scripter stuff, it was sort of like, okay, now that I can make MIDI tools, what if X was actually used for Y? And so I wanted to share a couple of examples of this because I think it shows kind of like my process a little bit and where I tend to go with this stuff. And so recently, this developer, Davin Lulan Vega, made this little tool. She posted a YouTube video of it where you draw a doodle and you let go and it carries on and it keeps going. And so my thought was, what if a looping doodle was actually used for MIDI generation? Like, what if you use this to make music? And I think if, maybe if you take a second to think about it, you can imagine like, okay, there's some kind of analogy here that would work. Like how do you take a concept from a different space and like use it for music or sound? And when I thought about it, the thing that I thought of was that this kind of repeating pattern, it's a time-based pattern, right? And it reminded me of a delay effect. There's an input that takes a certain amount of time. That's, it's recorded, and then it plays back and it plays back and it plays back. So it led me to sit down and make a little MIDI prototype. And this is actually just a couple weeks ago. And it's called Simon. And this is what I made. So, for those of you who might have had a little trouble following along, I'm not sure because it's just in case. Like the idea is essentially like you play a couple of notes, and then as soon as you let go of those notes, it just starts repeating the idea, and it will just repeat it forever until you input something new. And so it has sort of like a built-in tap tempo kind of quality to it. After making these kind of things for like 7 years, it's cool because it's like a muscle. And now I can prototype an idea like this in under an hour. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. And to be honest, like just in making this talk, I was already coming up with new ideas for this. And it was actually kind of a distraction. When I should have been working more on my talk, I was working on this tool. Thinking about how do I expand on the analogy here with kind of the inspiration, the doodle drawing tool, or like how do I improve on that analogy, or maybe how do I change it? And a lot of times I find that the analogy will kind of morph and shift away from where it was inspired from into something different, and it's fun to do that and to see where things take you. And so, since I put this talk together, I've already sort of like added features for like every time it repeats, it changes pitch, or like it does time scaling or reverses the phrase, just to see like, what's possible, and just to have fun with it. Davin's tool was inspired by this game Bleck that came out a while back. Which has a mechanic that's similar with the drawing and the repeating, and so there's this sort of like through line where it's kind of like a blend of the two ideas, like the byproducts idea, except these are different people, right? who didn't really interact necessarily, So it's like external, but then there's also sort of this crossing streams idea, right? Because it's like at least for Simon, it's pulling from a different space. In theory, this kind of chain could go on forever. I mean, who knows how many steps before this there were, and like, what the people who made Bleck were inspired by, and maybe someone will be inspired by this MIDI tool that I made, and they'll make something else, or they'll make music with it, which would also be cool. And that's sort of like making music with a tool is kind of like, it's kind of a different space in itself as well. So there will be, there were things before Bleck, and there will be things hopefully after Simon. And I think this idea, which is also a documentary, it sums up this idea very nicely. So here's another one. What if a dream about falling helicopter seeds? Those seeds that sort of twirl as they go to the ground. What if a dream I had about those was actually used for an arpeggiator design? So yeah, I'll show you the video for this. So the idea there was essentially like, you have these helicopter seeds, and when they fall, they're rotating. And this sort of rotating motion got me thinking about LFOs and about, I guess applying that type of modulation, using LFOs to apply modulation to an arpeggiator. So modulating time and like rate and maybe legato and velocity and things like that to create these interesting patterns. And here's one more example. Oops, I keep using the keyboard like it's my own slideshow here. What if a graphical dithering technique was actually used for filtering audio? So like the kind of dithering techniques that you would find in Photoshop or something when you want to save an image and save file size, or you want it to have a certain kind of noisy aesthetic. So here's a clip of that on a drum loop. So this was from a time where I got really into making audio effects in Unity, when I learned how easy it was to make audio effects in Unity. Similar to how the Scripter API kind of gave me a really easy way to make MIDI effects. There's a callback in Unity that makes it really easy to make audio effects. And so I just started making all these things, and a lot of it was centered around the idea of taking algorithms from other spaces, like graphics or math, and just wondering, like, what would this sound like if you applied it to kind of a signal like audio. And so it yielded a lot of interesting experiments, and it was a whole lot of fun. And this one's kind of cool because it kind of sounds like to me it almost sounds like a dithering, even though it's it sounds like the audio equivalent of dithering, but it's kind of But when you mess with it, you can kind of get like distortions and like kind of bit crusher type effects. So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, sometimes I build tools to solve pre-existing problems. I got really into old sound fonts for a while, like old sounds from the 90s. And a lot of those old sound fonts, some of the better ones would have, they might have like different samples on every key, but I would make context scripts to kind of like spruce those up, and I got really into context scripting to just kind of create more custom sounding sampled instruments. That's one example. And then like rolling my own code libraries that kind of built up over time from different projects that I could just use in my daily life when I'm using my computer to look up information. Maybe I need to do like a unit conversion, or maybe I need to like convert, I don't know, a tempo into milliseconds, or stuff like that. I mean, not necessarily like earth-shattering stuff. Like there's definitely tools out there for this kind of thing, but I also got really into making my own stuff. It's just it's like puzzle solving. So there is sort of a soothing, like therapeutic aspect to this as well. So kind of like it checks a lot of boxes for me. So sometimes I solve pre-existing problems with tools. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm really just messing around, inventing new problems. I think at this point, building tools is really it's a part of my creative process. Much in the way that, I might sit at the piano to do some like writing before I work on a film or something like that. When I have spare time, I try to dedicate time regularly to prototype things, and I have a backlog of ideas that, I really would like to explore. And so it's really just become a part of my creative process, and one of the things I enjoy most doing. And so sometimes a tool can aid in communicating some idea that you have, or giving you the ability to really integrate yourself with an idea. Maybe it's a style of music that you can't play super well. Maybe you can use technology to kind of aid you in that, or create in a new way. Just help you along a path, and learn, help you learn what works, what doesn't work. I read this book in college by a samurai, and this idea resonated with me. A carpenter sharpens his tool in spare moments. I like to iterate on my tools and my workflow, and try to find new ways to be creative. And I really think building things is like a muscle, and over time it's just led to more confidence in myself to try to build things. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to do a good job or accomplish things successfully, but it's just propelled me down more and more of these sort of explorations, and it's fun to explore slightly different spaces and see how those takeaways that you learn from those things can potentially like cross over into other things, even if it's within like an umbrella of say music or audio. And so it's really kind of branched out into lots of different kinds of tooling, making audio effects in Reactor and Unity, like I was talking about, context scripts, like which I also mentioned, but also like idea generator tools. This is one that is kind of a work in progress, but it's inspired by Brian Eno's oblique strategies. But the idea is hopefully to be a little bit more interactive and more explicit, with like giving, scales and potential ideas for stories, and kind of like dice rolling and making it more of a game. And then beyond this, just like put a lot of, thrown a lot of energy into, working on my like workflows for productivity, using my computer deeper, making my website more cool, like having like a random button on my website that'll just go to anything that's any album or any blog post, or even just making my email look pretty. Like these are the kind of things that I find myself doing now, which is cool. It's fun. But yeah, I think individually you're gonna know best. you're the person who can best improve, your workflows. It's going to be you for the most part. And sometimes that might mean making a tool, yes, but it might be simpler than that. It might just be a habit change. I think for me, sometimes I make tools when it's not even necessary per se, just for the challenge. It's fun to make tools. Sometimes I make tools to help somebody else, which is also fun for me. You can also use pre-existing frameworks to customize your workflow. There are a lot of good ones for doing that sort of stuff, and certainly, I've used pre-existing frameworks to make tools, just at a different level, right? I mean, when you're talking about an API or something like that, or a program that lets you kind of create little things within it, those are all examples. And I think it's worth mentioning that there's a big component of my workflow, which is tools for the noisemaker that don't make noise. And there's lots of robust ecosystems out there for that sort of thing. And I want to share a few of those that I really have gotten a lot of value out of. The first one is Obsidian.md, which is it's a markdown based note taking kind of program that is really, I use it for taking notes, but also staying organized. I use this every day. It's like a little personal flow chart for me to figure out what I need to be doing and keeping on top of tasks. And you can kind of surf it like a Wikipedia, like your own personal intranet, which is really cool. Use it to stay on top of tasks, jot down, synthesize new ideas. And because it's this sort of this community of people who are interested in tinkering and like kind of creating their own workflows, there's a lot of customization, plugins and all that sort of thing. And so it's very much a tool that you can use to, kind of custom tailor your experience. And then there's tools like Alfred and Keyboard Maestro, or non-Mac equivalents for automating and simplifying your computer usage. This is just a quick demo of a tool that I made in Alfred that lets me look up pertinent information for my projects, whether it's Bandcamp URLs, blog posts, and I built a lot of things like this to just make it easy to get at the information and the data that I need. There's tools to obviously help you calculate and keep track of things like spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets. I have so much fun with them. I use them for all manner of things, for making cue sheets for movies, keeping track of what sounds I got to make in games, but also cataloging my music. And here's finances. And this is a publicly available metric modulation calculator that I've been stewarding for a long time, since I found a version of it on an old forum, like an Excel version. So check that out if you're interested in nerdy rhythm changes. And this is all in the pursuit of staying more organized, minimizing unsavory tasks that I don't want to do, minimizing distractions when I could be chasing a creative flow, or sometimes it's just building is fun and just have fun learning and building on my own. And you need at least one bullet list in a talk, so there's that too. So all this tooling has led me down a different path in my creative life than I would have expected. And to celebrate, I decided to come up with a new moniker, like a new umbrella of sorts. And it's called D-Lab, or Disasterlab, which is the name I'll be using to release my tools to the public and to try to have fun with it. And one of the best things I learned in making music all these years is, especially early on, was that it was really important to share often. And now I'm having to relearn that lesson as I dive into building tools. There's a whole similar but different set of fears, associated with like sharing and, people using your tools and them not working for them, or, maybe they don't like the tools, but, sharing helps you make your tools better. For me, tools are really fun to build for myself, but it just feels like the right thing to do, to share. If you've made something that helps you, that's a tool. I feel like it's a really cool thing to share it with other people, and it opens up new possibilities for what, because someone else is going to do something totally different that you might not have thought of. And that's it. Happy tinkering, and thank you. And I'll take questions now if there's any time.
Thanks so much, Rich. I love echo. I love hearing where all your creativity comes from and how those things feed into each other, even though they may not necessarily be directly related to music or tool making. It's very, very cool. I've got a couple of questions for you. How do you balance learning and exploring new things with doing paid work? Is it hard to find the time?
Or maybe it really is like a core part of something that I'm trying to accomplish. And so I think that's part of why I've gotten really into procedural music and building audio systems for games, is that really scratches an itch that I have, which is to make these sort of systems and creative tools. When you're making systems for games, they're not necessarily like super utilitarian, something that can be very easily like, turned into something that other people can use, but it does have a clear application, and it does, like, it's a puzzle, and it scratches that itch for me. And also I know that I'm gonna learn a lot from that, and I'm sure that there'll be things that I can glean in the future if I ever wanted to, say, spin something into something else. Um, uh, yeah, so it's definitely tough. I think, for me, being a freelancer, prioritizing things, having boundaries, all of these things are super, super important, and also very challenging. So it's really like it's a very personal thing, figuring out like what is the most important thing for you to be doing at any particular point. And I think increasingly for me, it has been these explorations. But that's come from, at this stage in my career, I've been doing this a long time. I've had the opportunity to, put away some money, and, so my situation is a little bit more flexible for those sort of things. But even said, like, I still do try to, I try to incorporate some of these interests into my, if I have an opportunity to work on a game or something, I try to incorporate some of these things if it makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any tips or advice for music makers who are looking to start learning code?
I mean, for me, like my general like my general sense of it is that there's a fear component where it's like you have to overcome your fear of sucking. Like, you just have to try. You just have to do it. Like, when I was interested in this, I mean, it's not like, it's a little scary. But I just kind of threw myself into it and tried to figure out like how this works. And, I was, when I started, like, I was not good at coding. Like, I was very bad at it. And it took me a long time to sort of like get more comfortable with it. There's not everyone is going to have the same level of ease with it as everyone else, and that's okay. But if you're interested in it, I would say, give it a shot, and don't be afraid to be bad at it. Just start trying to make something. There's plenty of tutorials, things you can try. There are things, where they basically hold your hand through every step, and you can just kind of like get the feeling of like inputting things and seeing how it works. And I mean, so if there's hesitation to get started, I would say that that's a great way to start, is to find a tutorial like that.
It's battling that gifted child curse of instantly being good at stuff when you're a kid, and then all of a sudden you're bad at stuff and you don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah,
Could
it's
you
a problem.
talk more about how the Markov chain works with fetching new notes and scales?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. So the what I built essentially is a giant like if statement tree, where it's like it randomly picks a note from a scale. Okay, so say we know what scale we're in. Say we're in the Dorian mode or something. So we know what scale we're in. So there's only so many pitches to pick from. So we start by picking one of those notes. And now the important thing is the next note. Like, what is the next note going to be? And so whatever the previous note was, the next note, there's a limited set of options for what the next note is, or there's maybe all of the notes are options, but they each have a different probability of occurring. And so the way that I set this up in code is, you basically have you flip coins. Basically, you flip a coin but you can weight the coin. You can basically say, you generate a random value between 0 and 1, and if it's greater than 0.8, then do something. And so what you're essentially doing in that case is you're saying this has a 20% chance of occurring because it needs to be 0.8 or greater. And that's sort of the basic gist of how that system works. A lot of times when people do Markov chain stuff, they have a data set that they've kind of like compiled. I'm not sure that the way that I did it was like I manually made the data set like at the piano. And you can also get into like, multiple, I think they call it like second order or third order Markov chains, where it basically, you're like looking back multiple times. Like, imagine instead of just caring about what the last note was, you care about the last two notes. Like that adds an order of complexity, which I didn't get into, but like I haven't tried to do that, but maybe someday.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and all of your insights on the very cool tinkering that you do.
Yeah, my pleasure.